One of my colleagues said, I'm the first minister he has seen who steals from his own departments. I hope that's not your view, Chair, and the honorable members. I'm very excited about this because Ms. Makukule is the first Black and the first woman to be CFO of this department, which is a very important step forward. Although she's not appointed because of her color and gender, she is indeed a very capable person. The other DDG is Mr. Sam Zungu, who is now appointed as DDG for TVET colleges and has already started 1st of this month. In fact, he started on Saturday officially. And Ms. Nolwazi Gasa, who has been on contract as a DDG and is now appointed full-time by cabinet as DDG for planning. There is another DDG post that we have already interviewed for, which is DDG for Community Education and Training. The matter is now with the Department of Public Service and Administration. There are just some technical issues that we have to sort out about that process, which I am very hopeful that very soon it will be settled and then we are able to take the matter to cabinet for appointment. So in other words, we've interviewed for 4 in January and 3 are now appointed. I also must tell you about the vacant posts now of DDG University Education, as Dr. Diane Parker went on retirement at the end of January. And I'm pleased to say I have already advertised for that post, and the advertisement, the period of application has even closed. I am about to start with the process of shortlisting so that also we could do interviews as soon as possible. I must also inform the portfolio committee that the contract of the DG is coming to an end August, officially 6th September this year. And I have already, in order to minimize disruption in the middle of a year, financial year, I have already advertised for the post of the DG to employ a new DG. And in fact, the advert has even closed because my aim is to not have a gap at all between the departure of the current DG and the employment of a new DG by beginning of September. If all goes well, we will achieve that. Or even if there is a gap, it mustn't be big a gap. So, Chair, I'm starting with this because the Portfolio Committee has correctly been raising issues about these long-standing vacancies, at least at senior level. Now, this will help me also, apart from stabilizing the department, by the way, at national level, and also providing an opportunity for new leadership, new vision at management level to drive these commitments we are going to be talking about. It will also help me to speed up the appointment, filling of vacancies at the levels below DDGs. We may talk about that at some other stage. I'm still concerned that there are too many posts that are not filled, and I am prioritizing that now. With stability, full-time DDGs, that will help us to be able to move with speed, because my own philosophy, Chair, is that I would like that people at a lower level, their appointment must be led by their supervisors. In other words, if we are filling chief directors' posts, That selection process must be led by the respective or DDGs. That I have found to be something that actually contributes to stability and better functionality of departments. I also know this in my own past chair as a as a trained human resources practitioner. So that is going to help. I thought it is important so that the portfolio committee at least is somehow at ease that what we are going to be talking about today is actually going to be taken forward with much more stability at senior level of the department. Chair, I must just then say, we can't just be looking at the strat plan and the APP without looking at what has happened over the last year, because that, in a way, is what has shaped some of the adjustments that we are making. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown as a result or as a response by government and society to dealing with COVID-19, as you well know, has had an impact on the post-school education and training sector, a huge impact actually. As we have mentioned before, we adopted a risk-adjusted strategy informed by the National Coronavirus Command Council and Cabinet. And we were determined that despite the challenges we were facing, we had to shut down our institutions, as you know, at some stage completely as the country shut down. We were determined that no learner, we will do all in our efforts to ensure that no learner will be left behind, and that our efforts will be guided by our slogan that we adopted, #Save the Academic Year, #Save Lives, underlining the fact that we will seek to save the academic year, but the primary mission is to save lives. And we're to do this also through innovation and science, but we may talk a bit more about that when we do the Department of Science and Innovation later in the week. Through targeted interventions at each alert level in terms of our risk-adjusted strategy, we implemented efforts geared towards curbing the spread of the pandemic at our institutions, testing and providing support and ensuring that staff and students were safe, and students in particular had uninterrupted. We tried our best for our students not to have interrupted access to teaching and learning support materials, including access to affordable data and also access to educational content and website. Remember, we adopted what we called the multimodal method of teaching and learning, which provide online and non-online interventions. The one thing we had observed, Chair, but we have agreed, by the way, with USAF that we need to do serious research on this. Indications at the moment show that the performance of students in our university system in particular has been better than expected. Now, despite these challenges, now we don't know what would be the cause of that. We can only be anecdotal thus far. That is why, by the way, we've agreed not only with the Vice Chancellor's USAF, I've also had a meeting with the Council for Higher Education, indicating to them that I would like us to do a close study of this. Could it be that this maybe is telling us that we need to shift our teaching and learning methodology to be blended, to combine both online and contact? Much as a number of our institutions have been doing it, but more or less this time, all of our institutions have been forced to do this. But we need research. I have said this research needs to be done so that we learn appropriate lessons from this experience. But I'm very pleased to say that our efforts on the whole of saving lives in the academic year have had positive results. the 2020 reorganized or restructured academic program has enabled all the institutions and their students to complete the 2020 academic year. That's no mean achievement, Chair. Some people may take it for granted, but it is no mean achievement given the threat of instability that we faced to the system. Nevertheless, despite these positive strides, but the constantly changing environment has pushed us to review our initial commitments for the 2020 to 2025 strategic plan in preparation for the 2021-22 MTF, medium-term expenditure framework period. The lessons learned from the effects of the pandemic on the economy and the post-school education and training system at large had to be taken into consideration during the review process. Indeed, whether that's adequate or not, we invite you and we will welcome your own critical comments and inputs, Honorable Chair, and excuse me. Honorable Chair and honorable members. Now, I'm not going to go into detail. I'm just going to mention, just highlight a few things and more focus also on the context, background to these changes that we are actually making. As you know, Chair, that one of the most devastating impacts of COVID-19 has been on the economy, on our economy. And the president announced in October last year the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program, the ERRP, as our response to revitalize our economy. What is important in what the president said in announcing this is that we are not just wanting to go back to where we were prior to COVID-19, but we want to move forward to build a new economy in a new post-lockdown and hopefully post-COVID-19 period. That is very important because this poses particular challenges to the post-school education and training system because the post-school education and training system has to adjust and provide the skills needed for the reconstruction and recovery of our economy. Then it's against that background, then I highlight these few things. The first is actually the economy itself. I'm pleased to say that in the Cabinet Lekgotla this year, we had a special presentation that I presented before the Cabinet Lekgotla on the skills and development strategy in support of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. Chair, if you want us at some stage to come and present this to you, we would be more than happy to do so in some detail. So as to understand, it's not a perfect strategy, but Cabinet said it's precisely along the lines of what is required and what is needed. Now, some of the interventions that perhaps may not be mentioned in detail, but which I do need to make is that one of the interventions I've made already arising out of this skills development strategy in support of the ERRP has been to engage the SETAs very intensely. I've engaged, of course, all sectors, but I've engaged the SETAs very intensely to say, how do SETAs ready themselves to prioritize the implementation to support the ERRP in their own work? In addition to that, what I've done, Chair, has been to say to the SETAs, the monies that we have not committed, which are always there, unfortunately, can we not direct those funds to support specific programs in the ERRP? and that those funds should not return back to Treasury, but they must be committed. And I'm pleased to say to you, indeed, those funds have now been committed from the sitters to ERRP priorities. Again, we can engage about that, but also I'm more than willing to make a special presentation to the portfolio committee on that score. Now, that's just one example. As I've said, I'm not going to highlight everything on our role in supporting the ERRP. Portfolio committee will have to hold us to that. You say, this is what you're going to do in support of the ERRP. How are you doing that? That would be one platform for continuous engagement during this year. The other thing I just need to quickly highlight, Chair, is that we have now started during this financial year, as part of the APP and our state plan, the process towards the establishment of the 2 new universities, as announced by the President. The University of Science and Technology, which will be at Ekurhuleni Metro, as well as the Detective University, which we are working at now. I have assigned one of my special advisors, Professor Derek Swartz, given his own experience as a long-serving vice chancellor, as one of our distinguished vice chancellors, actually, to lead this process, working together with the department, the officials in the department, and other stakeholders. We are already, Thandi Lewin may want to add here, I'm sure, when a presentation is made. We are in the process, if not already, of forming the necessary committees, which also must include, by the way, representatives from the universities in Gauteng, because existing universities, we must take them on board, representatives from the Gauteng provincial government, representatives from the municipality, that's the steering committee, from Ekurhuleni municipality, so that everyone and other people, who are relevant to this, so that they are part of the steering committee and they are part of driving this program. We are very pleased about this because in establishing these universities, they will actually be the 5 new universities of a democratic South Africa, after having established Sfako Makgatho University, Sol Plaatje University in the Northern Cape, and University of Mpumalanga in the Mpumalanga province. So we continue to move to expand university education. The other issue then that we'll be talking about, which I would just like to highlight because I'm not going to go into detail, I just want to underline one thing, is student funding. Student funding, Chair. As you know, this matter is one of our own ongoing challenges that it's time now that we just get a proper handle on this. Now, on NSFAS, Chair, I want to say this, that insofar as government's policy is concerned of supporting students from the working class and the poor, at least to attain their first undergraduate or college qualification, that deal is met. In other words, this government has actually met its policy commitments to support the students of the working class and the poor. Every student who has been admitted and is deserving from the working class and the poor is getting NSFAS support. Of course, we are not saying that there are challenges in administration and management of NSFAS between NSFAS itself and institutions, but insofar as the government's commitments are concerned, these are met. As we had said, Chair, the demonstrations that we have increasingly now at the beginning of the year are largely from students who are not NSFAS students. And it's important to make this distinction because sometimes this thing gets presented, some of the people say there is no free higher education at all in South Africa, which is not true. There is free higher education for the working class and the poor, which is government's commitment. Now, of course, it does not mean that government is not concerned about what we call the missing middle students, but they fall outside. Like is the case, Chair. I think I do need also to clarify this. This ANC government's policy is towards helping, focusing on the poor and using means test. If you take all the programs of our government, whether it's the child grant, whether it's the old age grant, whether it's the grants for services for the indigent, for water, electricity, and other services, whether it's housing, whether it's basic education in terms of no-fee schools. If you look at all those policies, they are focusing on the poor. So is the case with higher education. But higher education, I would say government has even gone beyond the poorest of the poor to actually also embrace the working class, which includes working parents, but who are not earning enough. So that is the orientation, and that is the government policy that since 1994 has been voted for by the majority of South Africans. It's very important, Chair, that we don't lose this, because always when there are strikes at the beginning of the year, we fudge the issues as if government is not meeting its policy commitments on the working class and the poor. As I have presented this to the Portfolio Committee before, by the way, I don't need to repeat it other than to underline this. Now, the most important thing I want to say as background today is that Cabinet, in the wake of the challenges this year, said to me, Zimande, we want you to do a comprehensive review of student funding and come back to Cabinet before the end of June this year. I am in the process now. Thandi Lewin, Dr. Thandi Lewin, our acting DTG for Investor Education, may want to say a bit more about this, that we are in the process now of pulling the team together. We want the team, in fact, to start its work this week, and shortly, if it's not this week, no later than next week, so that they can do this work. I must say, a lot of work has been done on this scope, by the way. So this team that we are pulling together, we want this team to review, analyze this work, and come back with very concrete proposal on review of student funding in our country, including the work done by the HEHA Commission, which, by the way, in my previous stint as Minister of Higher Education, I made an extensive input. Also, dealing with the missing middle in my previous stint, I had also appointed a ministerial task team to look into this, apart from other earlier ministerial task teams that were appointed after 2009 to look at all these issues. Now is the opportunity to bring all this together and to say to Cabinet, this is the way forward, so that at least we can work towards not having a challenge at the beginning of each year insofar as student funding is concerned. But Chair, I would be irresponsible if I don't also highlight the fact that whilst increasing student funding is welcome, but it's not sufficient, because if we improve student funding at the expense of funding the system, we are then shooting ourselves in the foot. In fact, we would be cutting our nose to spite our face. Because already right now, there is threatening that student funding will be higher than the money we give to universities and colleges to run their affairs. Already with colleges, we're in big trouble, because we are funding colleges at about 62% when we should be funding them at about 80%. Universities, we are driving towards that, and it's a problem. As we increase student funding, we should also be pushing for increase. Otherwise, we are funding students to go into a system that will increasingly be unable to address their needs. What's the point of doing that? You will have higher failure rates. And also we may have a university system, by the way, that starts to lose some of its personnel, your lecturers and so on. What we must also bear in mind, Chair, a point, by the way, I made when congratulating the new Vice Chancellor, Professor Villaras, at Wits University, was this point that one of the key challenges we have in our country is to defend our public university system. South Africa's public university system is the single largest on the African continent. And globally, it's highly respected, albeit being uneven inside it, but it's highly respected globally. And we are in an African continent that unfortunately is witnessing an increase in private universities. We can't allow that. I have to say this, Chair, as we are looking at the APP and the strat plan for the next 4 to 5 years, because this portfolio committee must, as it has always done, continue to take an interest in this. What happens when university education becomes privatized? Here is what happens. Firstly, it's only the elite that are able to attend those institutions. That's one thing that has happened. And therefore, you are depriving the children of the working class and the poor of higher education. Number two, where private institutions accept poor students, those ones in particular tend to be of dubious quality. Some of them literally fly by night. So either way, the working class and the poor are not served. So to defend our public university system by ensuring that it's properly funded, but not only that, it also must be stable. We can't be having endless cycles of instability in our institutions, because what is also beginning to happen is that some parents now are beginning to take their children, and those are the parents we need in the public system because they can afford to pay, but are slowly beginning to say we are going to private higher education institutions because we can't stand the instability that is ongoing, which requires both government's intervention, but also intervention by student leadership. So that is another issue of funding the university system. But we cannot, and we will not, Chair, that's another thing I would like to say contextually, as I move towards ending now, because I can't take all your time, but I thought the matters I'm raising are important to contextualize the changes that will be presented and the challenges. We have to struggle not just for funding of universities. Our challenge is the need to increase funding for the whole of post-school education and training. I've made a presentation to you that of the 100 students who start grade 1, only 4 complete a university qualification, and usually after 6 or 7 years. Only 4. What happens to the 96? Now, this means, amongst other things, our policy, our white paper on post-school education and training says we need to expand the TVET college sector. Indeed, we've done a lot to try and do that, but we've got fiscal challenges that we are not growing it as much as we should be growing it. Because part of the challenge in the university system, Chair, for access, frankly, has a lot to do with the fact that we have no alternative paths for progression in the post-school, in the non-university post-school education and training sector. I would even argue that a good percentage of our students who start at university should not have started at university, either because they have no inclination for an academic orientation, or that's the only place they can go to. In a country like Germany, an advanced capitalist country like Germany, only 1/3 of their students leave school and go to university. 2/3, they become apprenticed. Even if it's not all, but most of them, they either get a job or they become apprentices. That's why they have a larger TVET college type system than the university system. Our own policy says for every university student, we should at least be having 3 TVET college students if we are to address this. Now, the last thing, Chair, I just want to highlight on my side is on infrastructure. Now, infrastructure is critical for this department. It's a whole lot of infrastructure, but the priority at the moment is student accommodation. And Chair, what I have done, because we need a systematic way of approaching this, is to restructure the management of infrastructure inside my own department of higher education and training. I've now said the planning branch must be responsible for coordinating infrastructure. You can't be having a university education branch coordinating its own infrastructure, dealing with its own infrastructure, TVET dealing with its own infrastructure, the CET branch dealing with its own infrastructure, the skills branch, by the way, which also does need infrastructure for skills programs, is also coordinating its own. I'm saying there must be one center inside my department because that has got lots of advantages. One, it's better planning. Number 2 is also what still remains my idea, that our educational institutions, we must turn them as much as is possible into multi-purpose educational institutions. Let me give an example very quickly, Chair. I have been approached and have agreed by the community of Guyana to say there is a former teacher training college infrastructure there, which is a white elephant just standing, not being adequately used. They want a university there. I've agreed with them that there must be a campus there, not a university necessarily for a start, but a university campus. Already, Tshwane University of Technology has expressed an interest. And that is good also that the community says what we need most is a university of technology. Diplomas, students who are going to be linked to workplaces right away. But that facility also, I've been thinking, it can also be used to offer community education and training programs. And if need be, why can't it also offer some TVET colleges in one educational center? Because one of the things that I started in my earlier stint as Minister of Higher Education and Training was precisely an audit of the extent to which our educational infrastructure is being used. Some of our educational infrastructure is used from 8 till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, from Monday to Friday, and it's lying idle, not being used on Saturdays and Sundays. Why can't it be used on Saturdays and Sundays for training programs, for example, for people who are working during the week, but they might want to actually some kind of training or to improve their education? So as we look to 2025, that's the kind of thinking we should be having when we are talking about infrastructure. But student accommodation is a priority within this. That is why I've appointed a ministerial advisory team, which I call the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Infrastructure, MAKI, which in the Nguni languages sounds like a builder, which is a very appropriate sounding type word because it's about waka for our own students to be able to have decent accommodation. And as the president said, the fiscus on its own won't be able to meet this, so we need public-private partnerships to be able to drive this, such that we can say by 2030, which is the end point of the NDP, we have at least solved the student accommodation crisis in our country. And I'm very determined that we work towards that. Chair, the funding, we will talk about it. I've said all what I've said, but one of the critical issues is that with the fiscal situation, the funding we have is not adequate. Which means, and even worse, by the way, as I have said, we managed to fully fund NSFAS this year, by taking away money from part of the university system. And we took money from college infrastructure in order to meet student funding. We can't operate that way. As I have said, we have to have a balanced system. This is one area that you will also have to look into closely, because you are the parliament, you are the members of the parliament that does the appropriations. Let me stop there, Chair, by way of introduction. Once more, I'm very thankful for the opportunity we are given to present department's plans. My team, senior management team, will be able to do this, the DG and the DDGs, to make the presentation. Ngiyabonga, kuyaleboga, uLasitulo.
Okay, Comrade Minister, thank you very much for your overview. I think it was quite elaborate, covering quite a number of key and strategic areas, which I think we must welcome that. I think what we should also welcome is the announcement on the stabilization of especially the high echelons of the department. I think that is very welcome, because we have been worried, as you are aware, of the vacancy rate at the top, because they do tend to create some instability and uncertainty, especially at the high level, which, as you know, it does affect the entire organization. But we would welcome that. We would very welcome that announcement of the appointment of the 3 DDGs. And one interview has been concluded, and there are processes to appoint the DG. The other DDG has been advertised. We welcome that. Thank you very much, Minister. We also welcome and accept your sort of request that you would like to interact with us and to present the skills development strategy that was presented at the Cabinet Lekgotla. We will try and facilitate that process, because we have not been engaging on the issues of skills development. We had given ourselves a responsibility that we will interact with at least 3 or more of the sitters at each parliamentary term, so that by the end of this 6th parliament, we have interacted with all the sitters, so we understand the landscape, so that as we deal with the skills development branch, we understand the entities that the skills development branch is supporting. So we will make a plan for that, so that we're able to receive that strategy, which supports government's economic renewal strategy or efforts. But otherwise, thank you very much, Minister. Let's then invite the Director General, Gwebs, to then address us on the details of the APP and the strategic plan. DG, are you on the platform?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Let me take this opportunity to pass my greetings to the Chair, honorable portfolio committee members, the Minister, Deputy Minister, staff in the ministry, my colleagues in the department. So I will try to project, Chair. Yeah, I don't know whether it's visible, Chair.
Yeah, it's we can see the presentation. Go ahead, DG.
All right, thank you very much. What we are trying to show here, Chair, is in respect to the revised strat plan, as well as the APP for the Department of Higher Education and Training, which impacts in the entire post-school education and training system. It is informed at a high-level framework about the resource kit that we have at our disposal, of which in this instance, the voted funds are around 94 billion, of which the CFO is going to elaborate on this. Out of which 78 point something billion is allocated for universities, that is university education. 12 point something billion is for TVET colleges. And about 2 point something billion is for CET from the voted funds. We know that then skills training development is funded through levies. That is for sector education and training authorities as well as NSF. I think this is quite important in respect to understanding and appreciating the amount of resources that are available and how these resources are deployed into giving effect for teaching and learning within the system, of which the universities, despite the challenges that may be there, are getting a lion's share. This is just the outline of the presentation, Chair, which would be looking at the legislative framework. We thought it would be important to just share this with the honorable members so that we get informed about the imperatives of the legislative framework within which we are actually operating as a department, of which in this instance, quite a number of them are actually looking at ensuring that there is cohesion, unison, and stability in the system as a whole. Now, as we are stating here that as the department, we derive legislative mandate from the Constitution within the purport of Section 29, which states as follows: everyone has the right to basic education, including adult basic education and to further education, which the state, through reasonable measures, must make progressively available. I will just mention, Chair, these pieces of legislation that are quite important, which is the Higher Education Act, which provides for a unified and nationally planned system of higher education, and for the Statutory Council on Higher Education, Continuing Education and Training Act number 16 of 2006, previously known as Further Education and Training Act. This then provides for the establishment, governance, and funding of CET and TVET colleges, as well as matters related to the provision of continuing education and training. We've got National Qualifications Framework Act, which provides for the National Qualifications Framework, the South African Qualifications Authority, and the Quality Councils, which is Council on Higher Education, Quality Council for Trades and Occupations, and Umalusi. It is for qualifications and the quality assurance of qualifications required on the sub-frameworks of the NQF, as well as for misrepresented or fraudulent qualifications. We've got Skills Development Act, which in the main provides for the National Skills Authority, which is an advisory body to the minister, and the QCTO, and regulates apprenticeships, learnerships, and matters related to skills development. Skills Development Levies Act, which provides for the imposition of skills development levies and matters related thereto. General and the Further Education and Training Quality Assurance Act, we call it GENFIQA, which then provides for the General and Further Education and Training Quality Assurance Council and for quality assurance of general and further education. The popularly known National Students Financial Aid Scheme, which provide for granting of loans and bursaries to eligible students attending public higher education institutions, as well as for the administration of such loans and bursaries. Honorable members would recall that initially the National Students Financial Aid Scheme was catering only for students who are in universities. So TVET college students were not initially funded through this scheme. This got introduced when the Minister Nzimande took over the newly established Higher Education and Training Department, where some initiatives were taken to introduce funding of students who are studying to in TVET colleges as well, and it has since grown to the level where it is at the present moment. South African Council for Educators Act, which provides for the continued existence of the South African Council for Educators, the functions of this council and its composition thereof. Our vision in the PSET system is informed by the National Development Plan, which sets the vision for the PSET. In 2013, Cabinet approved the white paper as well for PSET, which effectively became the policy instrument central for the achievement of the vision. These two pieces of huge policy initiatives in the country, for instance, NDP was developed at a time when the economic growth was anticipated to be going to grow around 3 to 6% per annum, as well as then the white paper for post-school education and training mirrored that projection by the NDP and developed a very ambitious vision, which is looking at giving effect to the growth and strengthening of the post-school education and training system. But as honorable members would know, the economy didn't grow according to those projections that were initially contemplated. And in relation to that, unemployment has been growing as well on the other hand. And worse now, the impact of the COVID-19, meaning therefore that some of the targets that were initially envisioned in the NDP are not practically realizable at the time at which they were set to be achieved. So some of the constraints, therefore, that have to be taken into consideration in this respect are related to that. So the white paper defines the priorities of the department for building and strengthening the PSET system and clearly profiles the vision for the growth of the PSET system. So the following then are the policy priorities of the white paper: a transformed, non-discriminatory, youth-focused PSET system, an expanded, diverse, purposefully differentiated, fit-for-purpose PSET system, an articulated PSET system, an accessible and successful PSET system that is strongly linked to the world of work. So the white paper also directs the department to elaborate a concrete plan for the period up to 2030. So the national plan for PSET, which is a draft, has been developed together with the National Skills Development Plan, which set the skills development priorities for the period up to 2030. In 2020, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation initiated a process for the revision of the 2019-20 to 2024 medium-term strategic framework. The review process was necessitated by the impact of the COVID-19 that has on service delivery and the economy in general. The department used the opportunity to look into how it could respond to the broader government initiatives towards economic recovery. Then the revised strat plan had to be developed, taking into consideration taking into account the changed economic environment due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is aligned to the reviewed MTSF 2019 to 2024, spells out the work to be done in a rapidly changing world necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Also commits the department to improve educational and employment outcomes of the PSET system. The annual performance plan reflects the specific outcomes of the department for the 2021-22 financial year, all of which contribute towards the realization of the expected 5-year outcomes. So the revised strat plan has, in its overview, has got these issues that are clearly spelled out in respect to the outcomes that we are envisioning. So the expanded access to PSET opportunities, improved efficiency and success of the PSET system, improved quality of PSET provision, a responsive PSET system, excellent business operations within DHET, amongst other things. Now, because of these developments, Chair, in respect to the shrinking fiscal base, informed in the main by COVID-19, members would recall that we effected reprioritization at institutional as well as college level in order to fund the demands that are related to COVID-19, be it PPEs that are required by institutions and colleges, and ensuring that there is compliance to the protocols that have been developed and gazetted by government, by all institutions, as well as adapting and providing the changed environment and the needs of teaching and learning in the new environment, where institutions and colleges had to adopt multimodal teaching and learning practices as a way of contending with the challenges of the new environment and challenges that are confronting the entire country as well as the system. Therefore, then, we had to work to support the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, as the minister indicated already. The ERRP recognizes the extent of the crisis caused by the pandemic and takes into account that the impact of this global pandemic is exacerbated by the context of a decade of a stagnant economy and low levels of investment and growth in South Africa. The plan stresses skills development as both critical in driving South Africa's economic reconstruction and recovery, and key in sustaining it as well. So the department is developing a skills strategy to support government's efforts towards mitigating the impact of COVID-19 and the initiatives towards economic social recovery. Managing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic at institutional level. Working with higher health, a comprehensive COVID-19 PSET guidelines were released as early as April 2020, followed by specific protocols and interventions at that level. This initiative played a critical role in helping our institutions to understand their unique risks and needs and contend with those challenges that are associated with COVID-19. I think members would actually acknowledge that the management of the pandemic at institutional level, college level, has been managed quite very well by our system interactions, as well as the proactive initiatives that have been taken, to an extent that though they are a point of high concentration of human beings, but they never contributed to super spreading the virus in their own practices. And this, in the main, is because of the work and how they actually prepared to contend and live with the challenges that are related to COVID-19, which required huge resources, of course, amongst other things, because they had to divert those resources from other programs in order to contend this situation, to save lives in the main. So the department will continue to work with higher health to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on the PSET sector in line with government's risk-adjusted strategy. Managing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic at institutional level. Going further, Chair, from that point, the funding of eligible students through NSFAS is another issue. Here, what I think is quite important is the sustainability and effective administration of NSFAS, which is key to the success of the financial aid system. This remains a priority for the period covered by the Strat Plan. Guidelines for the implementation of the DHET bursary scheme for poor and working class students at public universities will be developed and updated annually. The department will also work towards a financial aid system that would be inclusive of missing middle students, as the minister has actually indicated. Now, one of the things then that had to happen in respect to reprioritization was to look at how then some of the targets would have to be revised, taking into account the areas from which funds have been reprioritized at an institutional as well as a college level. For instance, in respect to the question of access to PSET opportunities, the enrollment in TVET colleges was looked to be around 710,000. It has been revised down now to 620,000. CET colleges, it was around 555,194. Now it stands at 388,782. So budget cuts then over the next MTF due to the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and the ability of the state to generate required tax revenue is the reason in the main for the revision of these targets. Also, in respect to the development of new generation of academic posts in our institutions, we looked at 100, now it has been revised down to 85. Provisional learning program for enrollments, pre-learning programs for enrollments in TVET colleges, 7,000. It has been revised to 4,000 at the present moment. This is all due to the budget cuts, Chair. Now, the placement of TVET lecturers in industry or in exchange programs, which was looked to be at around 33%, now stands at 18%. So this is the replacement this is because of the replacement of lecturers in industry during 2018-19, which was 8.8% and dropped to 7% during 2019-20. The advent of COVID-19 then created an additional obstacle for colleges to place lecturers in industry, amongst other critical challenges that we had to contend with. This is the trend, Chair. Here, in respect to the outcome of quality of PSET provisioning. So the percentage of universities that have developed articulation implementation plans with TVET colleges, we're looking, they stand now at 80% of universities of technology would actually be doing this, because we thought in order to contend with the rapid needs that are related to 4IR digital developments in the country, we would have to look at what would be the new outcome indicators and targets that would actually assist into ensuring that we get into this space quite heavily in order to make an impact. So comprehensive universities, it stands at 80%. The traditional universities, it stands at 50% of their capacity. These are new indicators, Chair, from the revised MTSF, as I indicated earlier on. Now, responsive PSET system, lecturers participating and training in project-based lecturer capacity building programs in engineering, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. We are targeting 300 at the present moment. Lecturers participating in digital literacy programs, 6,000. TVET colleges with 4IR centers of excellence established. We think all of them, they should actually be partaking in this important initiative. Now, the NEET students taking part in CT college occupational skills programs becoming economically active, we're looking at around 90%, with a view of ensuring that aspects of the national policy on student and community support services will be implemented in 2021 academic year. Funding is not available to set up systems in colleges to track and trace students to report on this outcome. But we are going to improvise some mechanisms of ensuring monitoring that would be effective in this regard, so that we do not lose out in what we are doing, finding ourselves working in the dark in respect to this particular area. Now we're coming to the specific programs in the department. I'll run through quickly, Chair. Here, administration, which is program 1, whose purpose is to provide strategic leadership, management, and support services for the department. Now, key outputs then for 2021-22 financial year is to ensure that all valid invoices from creditors are paid within 30 days, in compliance with the law, of course, obtain an unqualified audit opinion from the Auditor General, field advertised post within 20 days from the current 150 days, resolve all disciplinary cases within 90 days per annum, and conclude all investigations on irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure concluded within 180 days. Program 2, which is planning, policy, and strategy. The purpose is to provide strategic direction in the development, implementation, and monitoring of departmental policies and in the human resource development strategy for South Africa. The key outputs, therefore, is to consider the recommendations of the work of the ministerial task team on multimodal blended learning in preparation for the development of the strategy for expanding online learning in PSET system. Consult on the proposed amendments of RPL, that is the recognition of prior learning coordination policy, and report accordingly by 31st March 2022. Produce a baseline report for articulation implementation between DHET and universities by 31st March 2022. Sign 2 new agreements for international scholarships with foreign countries to promote international relations. This is hampered by COVID-19 because of the restriction in traveling as well. So this is an area which is quite a bit sluggish in our operations at the present moment. But we're monitoring the situation, and any opportunity that becomes available, we let into it with the speed. And also produce a report on social inclusion in the PSET system by 31st March 2022. Track progress on the implementation of the gender equality and the GPV policy framework for the PSET system. A report will be produced by 31st March 2022. Implement the integrated infrastructure development support program and produce a report by 31st March 2022. Monitor the achievement of macro infrastructure framework milestones and produce a report by 31st March 2022. Develop a report on multifaceted student accommodation strategy by 31st March 2022. This is one of the challenging areas that the minister has actually mentioned, student accommodation. And there are quite a variety or a lot of interest groups out there who wanted to let into this 31st March 2022. And this work in terms of provision is currently happening in the system, Chair. There is a lot of assistance to the system in order to actually up the enrollment of e-learning as well as open learning in the system in order to complement other methods of teaching and learning that are in there at the present moment. And also submit the NQF amendment bill for approval by Parliament by 31st March 2022. And then produce 3 research reports to support decision-making in respect to improving the responsiveness of the PSET system. In this respect, we research into establishing the nature and the extent of demand of skills and programs in the system. And then the supply should actually respond to that need that has been scientifically established in the system. So we will have to report on skill supply and demand, report on priority skills, report on statistics on PSET by 31st March 2022. Now, in respect to the university education, the purpose here is to develop and coordinate policy and regulate frameworks for an effective and efficient university education system, provide financial and other support to universities, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme and National Higher Education Institute. One of the key outputs, some of the key outputs, Chair, is to produce a report on the achievement of ministerial enrollment planning targets by 31st March 2022, because the enrollment in the system is pre-planned in order for it to be aligned to the resources and the capacity of the system, so that we don't overload the system and enroll students in a system that is collapsing. It would be defeating the purpose. Submit to the Minister a fee regulation framework for approval by 31st December 2021. Submit to the Minister a feasibility study to establish the nature and scope as well as location of the new institution in the Ekurhuleni Metro for approval by 31st March 2022. Produce an oversight report on the historical disadvantaged institution development program by 31st March 2022. Updated guidelines submitted to the Minister for the implementation of the DHET bursary scheme for poor and working class students at public universities for approval by 31st December 2021, and implement the central application service targeting 13 public universities and 25 TVET colleges. Some of the key outputs, Chair, also related to the implementation of the Staffing South Africa's University Framework, which is a program which is actually looking at ensuring that transformation becomes quite embedded, systemic, and sustained within the system. 40 scholarship or internship positions will be allocated to universities through Nurturing Emerging Scholars program. This program looks at identifying potential students in their undergrad and offer opportunities for them to go through postgrad studies with a view of them pursuing the academic route. 85 new generation of academics program lecturer posts will be allocated to universities. 40 doctoral scholarships will be allocated to universities through the university staff doctoral program for award to permanent instructional or research staff members. And the policy here is that should be 80% Black or women, 50 awards made to permanent instructional or research staff at universities to participate in the Future Professors program. Then submitted to the Minister draft revised reporting regulations for public universities for approval for public consultation by 31st March 2022. Develop a strategy and a plan on the internationalization of higher education by September 2021. Support the establishment of centers of African language teaching at universities through project funding, implementation and guidelines. Planned target is 1. Develop an implementation framework for the policy on languages in higher education by 31st March 2022. You can see, Chair, there is a lot for universities. It's equal to the money they are allocated to. You produce various oversight reports on the following: financial health of all public higher education institutions. This we work quite closely with institutions to determine as to how they are managing their finances, and where we feel that the management is not prudent enough for the good of the institution. We devise some mechanisms to get in and assist institutions. And if things really come out of hand, then we put to the attention of the minister to issue some directives which may lead to the appointment of the independent assessor, and ultimately, if then the evidence suggests that an institution has to be put under administration. So there's a lot of work in respect to this particular area in terms of monitoring the practices at an institutional level. Governance of all public higher education institutions, which is related to the above, compliance of private higher education institutions to the regulations, including ensuring that there are no fly-by-nights, needs analysis and framework for the university governance program, implementation of the higher education leadership and management program as part of university capacity development program. Because one of the things that we thought we needed to do proactively is to develop and offer programs in our institutions that would develop the management and administrative leadership capabilities of our staff in our institutions, so that you have got a huge pool of people who could actually contribute in leading and managing our institutions. The evaluation of the 2019 research outputs of public universities, we do it regularly in interaction with our institutions and put incentives that are quite relevant to the sector, so that we're able to keep abreast with the developments and compete in the global platform for our quality of research, the evaluation of creative and innovation inputs by public universities, implementation of the entrepreneurship development in higher education program, implementation of the international scholarship program, undergraduate cohort study, tracking student throughput in the system. Here, Chair, program 4 is the technical and vocational education and training, whose purpose is to plan, develop, implement, monitor, maintain, and evaluate national policy, program assessment practices and systems for TVET colleges, provide financial and other support to TVET colleges and regional offices as well. The key outputs then would be to develop a draft 3-year enrollment plan with differentiation in program enrollment by 31st March 2022, produce final framework and the guidelines to accommodate students with disabilities by 31st March 2022. 2 TVET colleges with the established disability support units to support students with disabilities by 31st March 2022, develop model for efficient utilization of current TVET infrastructure by 31st March 2022, and also produce a report on cooperation agreement with with Germany on South African Institute for Vocational Education and continuing, on South African Institute for Vocational and Continuing Education and Training by 31st of March 2022, release examination results per cycle for qualifying students from last date of exams within 40 days, 100% eradication of certification backlog, produce quarterly monitoring reports on the conduct, management, and administration of TVET college examinations and assessment by 31st March 2022. Support 200 TVET college lecturers holding appropriate qualifications to acquire professional qualifications, produce final governance standards and regulations for TVET college councils by 31st March 2022, produce monitoring framework and plan for the implementation of the institutional maturity model by 31st March 2022. Increase the number of students placed in workplaces for experiential learning, because this we think is quite key in producing quality graduates that would be easily employable or easily establish employment initiatives for themselves so that they can be able to earn a living. Support 5 TVET colleges to establish entrepreneurship hubs in TVET colleges by 31st March 2022. Approve 10 new or revised subject curricula for TVET colleges for implementation by 31st March 2022. We are doing this working hand in glove with the QCTO so that the programs that we are actually developing are able to venture into the new needs of the 4IR and digital space, out there that would actually make our graduates to be portable and flexible in terms of employment, or initiating programs that would earn them living on their own. Upscale digital training in 35 TVET colleges in 2021-22 financial year as well. In respect to skills development, Chair, we're seeking to promote and monitor the National Skills Development Strategy, develop skills development policies and regulatory frameworks for an effective skills development system. The key outputs for the financial year we are in is to submit to the Minister 21 sector skills plans aligned to the updated sector skills planning framework for approval by 31st March 2022, produce consolidated sectoral occupations in high demand by 31st March 2022. Average lead time on trade testing to be 40 days. Learners or students placed in web-based learning programs, 103,750. Learners registered in skills development programs, 147,000. Learners entering artisanal programs, 21,500. Artisans found competent, 19,500. Learners who completed learnerships annually, 30,650. Learners who completed internships annually, 4,875, and also produce a report on the implementation of National Skills Development Strategy by SITAs by 31st March 2022. In respect to the community education and training, that is CET, the purpose is to plan, develop, implement, monitor, maintain, and evaluate national policy, program assessment practices, and systems for community education and training. We provide financial and other support to CET colleges. The outputs there is to appoint a service provider to develop a sustained funding model for CET colleges by 30th September 2021, implement advocacy strategy to improve the image of the CET college sector and produce a report by 31st March 2022. Implement teaching and learning improvement plans at CET colleges and report biannually in that respect. Develop open learning and teaching support materials in adult education and training sub-level 3 in the fundamentals by 31st March 2022. Submit also to the Minister final governance standards and regulations for CET College Council for approval by 31st March 2022. Train 900 CET College lecturers by 31st March 2022. Conduct capacity building workshops to facilitate student leadership, center managers, management, and councils by 31st March 2022. Train 36 CET college and regional staff on the national policy on student and community support services. Allocate 10% of earmarked funding to capacitate 54 pilot centers by 31st March 2022. Also, all CET colleges will be compliant with the policy on the conduct and management of examination and assessment by 31st March 2022. Accredit 54 community learning centers by 31st March 2022. Monitor and report on the CET college sector performance biannually. Develop a register of CET programs for approval by the DG by 31st March 2022. Introduce programs on digital skills and entrepreneurship in CET colleges by 31st March 2022. Now, Chair, we are getting to the financial information of the department, which would be presented with a view of putting to the members an explanation of the department's budget structure and budget trends over the 2020-21 MTF period, as well as the summary of the allocations over the 2021 MTF, a summary of the allocations for the 2021-22 financial year. And in this respect, I would like to hand over to the CFO to take us through the presentation. Will you project from your side, CFO?
Morning, DG. You can continue if it's okay with you. Otherwise, I'm also happy to project for myself.
All right. Let me hear from you then.
Okay, that should be fine. Good morning, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, Minister and Deputy Minister. As the DG has said, I will take the committee through financial information in the same order that he has alluded to. The budget structure, which I won't say much about it because I think DG has already presented the programs of the department and all the key outputs that proposed earlier on. And I'll then go straight to a summary of allocation and also over the MTF and also the detailed allocation for the year one of the MTF cycle, which is this current year, 2020-2021. You can proceed, DG. We can skip this part because DG, you have already explained the purpose of each program, but also just to emphasize that our budget is divided between those 6 programs. So the budget for the post-school education and training has an average annual increase of 1.4% over the MTF period. The department's baseline reduction, which is the budget cuts over this MTF period, amount to 4.969 billion in 2021-22, 6.429 billion in 2022-23, and 9.422 billion in the last year of the MTF cycle, which is 2023-24. This baseline reduction were imposed in order to address the economic situation in the country. The minister has already alluded to that, and the DG also to a greater extent in his APP and strat plan presentation mentioned that. And we've also seen how the targets were adjusted downwards to ensure that whatever we plan to do is within the available budget. So this slide shows the MTF allocations and also how we have moved from the indicative budget to the revised budget. The indicative baseline, which is the top row on the slide, is the budget that we had in the previous MTF. However, with the effects of the cuts, it had to be revised downwards, as we can see in year one, which is 2021-22. We had an indicative budget when we were doing 2020 MTF. Our indicative budget was 120.6 billion rand. But with all the cuts, our budget is now sitting at 115.6 billion, and we see a similar trend continuing in year 2 and year 3 of the MTF cycle. These cards and the same that I've presented in the previous slides are the net of the baseline increases and decreases. And I also need to clarify that the baseline increases do not represent new money, as there was no additional funding in the department. And the slides that has been projected is emphasizing the negative impact of the budget cuts. We are also highlighting the fact that the department prioritized its own budget to address the projected shortfall at NSFAS for this academic year. I think the minister has alluded to that. This slide also provides an analysis on the average projected spending for each sector over the MTEF period. It has been said earlier on that the university funding is the largest, take the largest portion of the budget. We see the average spending rate over the MTEF, or projected spending rate rather, is at 63.8%. And the projected average spending rate for the TVET colleges is 15.8%. And the rate for the skills levy is 16.3%. I note that the analysis for the CET sector is not captured on the slide. This sector, as most members will be aware, receives the smallest allocation, and their projected average spending rate is 2.5% over the MTEF. We can move to the next slide. This slide provides more details on the baseline increases and decreases. Chair and honorable members will remember that I have mentioned earlier on that the baseline increases do not represent new money. It is an internal reprioritization where we had to cut our budget from other areas in order to alleviate budgetary constraints that we experienced by, in this case, Council on Higher Education. We had some pressures at the CET College, and there were some pressures at SAQA. And therefore, based on that reprioritization, we gave CHE an additional 60 million rand over the MTEF, and also over 120 million rand was reprioritized to support the colleges for their cleaning services in their centers and satellite offices, as they did not have this service before. And also through our own reprioritization, we availed additional 5 million to SAQA. It also needs to be mentioned that the department had also ensured that there was no budget cuts that were effected on the SAQA budget. Based on the approach that was used to effect the budget cuts over the MTEF, SAQA budget will have been cut, or should have been cut, by 41 million rand. But because based on the challenges that were prevailing at the entity, the department has opted to absorb the cuts. So actually the additional support that was given to SAQA is the 5 million rand that is projected, plus the 41 million rand that was supposed to be cut and instead has been absorbed by the department. Chair and members will remember that late last year, SAQA almost retrenched a number of staff members due to funding challenges, as they have lost most of their external revenue during the lockdown. And as a department, we believe that this financial intervention will assist the entity to be back on its feet again. And then in terms of the bottom part, which is the baseline increases, baseline decreases, okay, before I move that, I also need to clarify the issue of compensation of employees, TVET post-provisioning norms. That is actually a reclassification of budget. The budget was previously under transfers and subsidies, but because, and it was because some of the staff members at the colleges were paid directly by the colleges. However, the department is embarking on the post-provisioning norm processes, and based on this model, these officials will have to be moved to the payroll system of the department. So as a result, then there had to be a reclassification of budget from transfers and subsidies to the compensation of the employee. So that's what that is all about. And then in terms of the baseline decreases, this includes the budget cuts, money that was taken out of the vote, and also the internal reprioritization and the budget reclassification as indicated above. Members show this is so visible and evident that these cuts are too deep. When we look at the budget for the compensation of employees, it has been cut by 1.5 billion in year one, 1.9 billion in year two, 1.2 billion in year three, and this is 4.6 billion cut for salaries over the MTF cycle. We also see the NSFAS budget has been cut by 6.9 billion rand over the MTF. This is despite the funding challenges that have been faced by the entity. And also the reduction on the TVET and universities are also quite huge. Some of it were meant for the infrastructure, being it a new infrastructure and refurbishments. And yes, and I also need to clarify that the reduction on the TVET also include the reclassified budget for the post-provision norms. However, it does not take away the fact that the cuts are huge. And the last row on the slide is the total decrease. So it means it's a net of reprioritized budget and reprioritized budget. So the total decrease is the money that has gone out of the vote, which is in aggregate, it's 20.8 billion rand. We can move. This slide analyzes the budget cuts and increases over the MTF. I've already covered most of the issues in the previous slide. I've spoken about the NSFAS cut, and as I said, the cuts for universities are huge. We see it's 7.7 billion rand for universities over the medium term. And these cuts were mainly inflicted on university subsidies and infrastructure, as I've mentioned. Also for the TVET, 1.4 billion over the MTF period, almost $1 billion of that is for infrastructure, and the balance is for the subsidies. It should also be noted that the reprioritization that was made earlier on this year to cover the NSFAS shortfall, it's not yet effected here because the time when that reprioritization took place at the APP process was already concluded. So what this means is that those cuts for universities and the TVET will have to go up when we do the adjustment budget to take care of that reprioritization. For example, the university subsidy and grants contributed about 2.5 billion rand to fund the NSFAS shortfall. So it means arithmetically their cut will have to go up by 2.5 billion rand, and 500 million rand was taken from TVET college infrastructure also to fund the NSFAS shortfall. And also the same, it means the budget cuts later in the year when we do the adjustments budget for the MTF for TVET will be approximately 2 billion rand. I think I've already spoken about the employees and also the increase from the previous slide. DG, we can move on. Thank you. This slide, Honorable Chair and members, analyzes the growth of our budget in nominal and in real terms. It also compares the spending on higher education to the overall government spending, and that of the total education budget, which includes the basic education. In terms of the nominal growth, meaning before taking inflation into account, the current budget for 2021-22 declined by 1.1% when compared to what was originally allocated in the prior year. This, we hardly see this, Chair. We know it's common that budgets do not grow in real terms, but we hardly see situations where budgets even decline in nominal terms. So we are worse off where we are now as compared to where we were last year this time. And in the two outer years, the nominal growth it's 4% and 1%, respectively. And when we analyze the budget in real terms, which takes inflation into account, the budget has declined in all the 3 years. It is worse in year 1, it declines by 5%, and in year 2 by 0.02%, and I mean by 0.2%, and in the last year by 2.7%. And looking at the second column, which is the 2020-21 column, on both the nominal and real growth, it shows that, like I said, the situation last year was better than it is now in 2021-22 and beyond. As we can see in that column, we had a positive nominal growth of 7.9 and a real growth of 4.6%. And then when we also analyze the spending on higher education and share of GDP, I need to put a disclaimer: this did not take care of other higher education spending that might be sitting outside the department. And although it shows that it is at the constant level of 2%, there is a slight decline in year 2 and in year 3. And also looking at the consolidated government expenditure when compared to that of higher education spending, our spending constitute approximately 6%, approximately 6% of the consolidated government expenditure, and it seems to be a constant trend throughout the MTF cycle, though it goes higher and lower by 0.1%. And also comparing to the total spending of education that includes basic education, higher education spending constitute approximately 30% of the spending. We can move to. And this slide provides information on the estimated collection of the skills development levy. The committee will remember that the skills levy was severely affected in the prior year due to the pandemic. The contributions by the employers have declined substantially, and there was also a 4-month payment holiday. As a result, the skills levy budget was revised last year downwards, initially by 42%, and later it moved up to 48%. It was revised from 19.4 billion to 10.2 billion last year. So when we close our books, we had a skills levy budget of 10.2 billion. But these MTF estimates are encouraging and exciting. And if it were to materialize, it means the skills levy will significantly increase in the MTF cycle. And the projections suggest that the 2.2 billion that we had last year is likely to double to 20.8 billion in year 3, which is the final year of this MTF cycle. Can move, PG. Okay, I think we can skip these slides. I've already mentioned most of the things here previously. Thank you. And Chair and members, this slides now shows how the budget is allocated per program and over the MTF, and it also shows, it gives us also the adjusted appropriation that we had in the prior for fair comparison. And it has been said, I think, in the previous presentations of the APP that the education branch constituted the biggest budget. We can also see throughout the financial year. And when you also look consistently, their budget is more than 80% of the voted funds. And most of the budgets goes to university, and some of it goes to NSFAS, which ultimately most of the NSFAS funding goes to university. And also the second biggest allocation we see is the skills levy, and it follows by the TVET and then the CET. And normally program 1 and program 2 do not carry huge budgets, as we do not have big programs, and only program 2 that transfers money to SAQA and CHE, not SAQA, SAQA and Higher Health. My sincere apologies. You can move. And this is the same budget, but analyzed per economic classification. And we see our salaries, it looks big at 9% of our total budget. It must just be remembered that DDG Corporate Services will remind me, but I know we having over 20,000 or approximately 30,000 staff members that is being carried by that bill. It includes the staff members at head office and those that are at the colleges, academic and support staff. And we have our goods and services, which is a small portion, but when you look at the prior year allocation, there is a sharp increase. And the reason for this is that during the adjustment budget last year, we have voluntarily reduced our goods and services budget because